what we're going to see happening here in chapter 6 is he's going to now be contrasting righteousness versus unrighteousness. And he's wanting to be getting us to think about which one are you obeying in your heart, righteousness versus unrighteousness. We think of law as being like this written thing of the Torah. He's talking about there's a way that we live or a way that we would think, an approach. You know, we all have our own internal way of doing things that we think is right and wrong. The one that comes from the flesh, though, is the law of sin and death. In other words, the way that seems right to a man leads to death. Okay, so he calls that the law of sin and death. Not that it's an actual written thing. It's just our default. If we're just left on our own, we're going to do things that eventually lead to sin and death. And so he's saying here, if we have died to that law, in other words, if we've died to sin, should we continue sinning? He says, no, we've discovered that there's actually a different path. We'll call the law of sin and death a path, a way of life, and then there's the law of Torah, which is a way of life. He's saying, so we're going to contrast these two. Once he died, the other path became functional. In other words, if you walked out Torah, you could then have life. So it means that everybody that ever lived pre his death and after his death who chose the Torah path could have life. That's why the people came to him and said, great master, what do we need to do to have eternal life? And he said, well, keep the commandments. The commandments are the path to life. He died once for all, but he lives to Elohim, which means that just because he died once for all doesn't mean you automatically get everything. You have to live to Elohim like he lives to Elohim to get the stuff that comes after the dying to sin. Did you follow that? Again, he keeps saying over and over again, stop sinning, don't sin. You've been redeemed, stop sinning. So how does a Christian pastor, teacher, all these guys out there that are doing the teaching, I won't pick on the people that are sitting in the pews, in the chairs. How do those guys read this and say that then now it's okay to do all these things that are defined by the law as sin? Here's their hero, Paul, saying, stop sinning. See, the problem is, and we're going to see this even in this translation that I use, the ISR scriptures, is that the word in the Greek is the same everywhere, whether it says law or sometimes it's translated in here as Torah. And they have to arbitrarily try to guess which one Paul's talking about. The only way for us to know is by context. Think about when you were younger. Okay, a lot of you can think back and remember what it was like to go out and go to parties and do whatever you did. And you remember coming home and feeling guilty. Why did you feel guilty? Because there was something in you that said, you know what? That seemed like fun at the time, but really, that was dumb. That didn't bear fruit. You see, look at the fruit and you would know. And then when I got older and I met people that were Torah observant and I got to go out and hang out with them on an evening, like after Shabbat, we'd go and hang out. And I came home, no guilt, no bad fruit. I felt refreshed and awesome because we hung out with people that were Torah observant. They were behaving properly. We were focused and still talking about things from above. Look at the fruit. So here in chapter 7, we're now going to change gears just a little bit because now Shaul is going to confess. He's going to give a testimony of his own personal struggle with what he just showed you. See, he just explained this battle between sin and righteousness and the two laws. And now he's going to go through a process of explaining to the people, look, I have struggled with this. The Torah is not the problem. The Torah defines sin. So how many things did you learn when you first came into this to say, wow, I had no idea that was wrong. You didn't know eating certain things was wrong. You didn't need keeping certain days was wrong. There was lots of things that you did. You knew murder was wrong. You probably knew stealing was wrong. You probably knew adultery was wrong. Lots of things you knew were wrong, but a lot of things you're like, I had no idea. Abba was trying to get my attention by showing me the law, showing me as a sinner, and the more I saw, the more I realized what a horrible sinner I was, that eventually I'd realize I need to change. It was a wake-up call. It's like we're addicted. Whether you want to use alcohol or sex or anger or food or whatever we get addicted to. How do you stop what you lust for so badly when you know you need to stop? Well, that verse is for all of us, right? We all have some things in our life that we know what's right and we want to do it, but we don't. And we know what's wrong and we don't want to do it, but we do it anyway. because we've not yet gotten to kill that part of our members. We have not put that, the me. I've not put the me to death. And so there's this contrast that we're going to really read a lot more about as we get into chapter 8. This huge contrast being set up here between the law of sin and death, which is the natural law in our members that battles against the law of Elohim, which we call Torah. And that's really what Paul's trying to talk about here through these chapters. But yet, this is used to attack Torah observance. Because remember, here he's comparing flesh and spirit to the law of sin and death versus the law of Elohim. See, again, Christians will tend to spiritualize or get more whatever non-concrete with this idea we're walking in the spirit. He's making it a very concrete metaphor. The flesh has the law of sin and death. The spirit, he says the Torah is spiritual. So when you're walking in the Torah, you're walking in the spirit. When you're walking in the flesh, you're walking in the law of sin and death. Not complicated. So when people talk about, we're not walking in the Spirit enough, that's Torah obedience. It's not this other, Pentecostal, charismatic, whatever thing you want to put on it. It's not that complicated. Walking in the Spirit means you're walking in the Torah. But not just walking in it mechanically by the letter, in the fullness of how it was intended. With the depth of how it was intended. There's a 3-letter word that screws the whole deal up, let. You've got to let it. In other words, you have to consciously make that decision. It doesn't happen by fiat. The creator of the universe doesn't just wave his hand and put Yeshua's mind in you. You've got to let this mind be in you. The mind of Yeshua. Let's not be guessing what we think he would do. What did he do? Well, he was perfect in his Torah observance. He was perfect in his submission to his Father. He was perfect in putting others ahead and not putting his own desires in the mix at all. He says, only that which my Father tells me to say, I say. Only what he tells me to do, I do. It's all about him. By the way, that's our life too. If we want to commit to it, it's all about him.